is this a coded recipe? Is this an experiential report of like alchemy going successfully? Is it just an artistic depiction and nothing more? You know, like the alchemy art is so puzzling but surreal, but also it calls to your soul. You know, you were mentioning your soul, and it speaks to some deep part of you. You know, what would you say about that?
Well, no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has to do with this idea that the further back you look, we see more and more of this kind of mythopoetic thread of viewing the world. All of these traditions, especially esoteric traditions, you know, you look at something like Kabbalah, items that you see, people that you see, animals that you see, they're not just the physical thing, they're also these correspondences. You know, they match up with certain planets, they match up with certain stories, myths, and gods.
Was there any accounts of someone successfully transmuting lead to gold, or is that a metaphor, or is that a myth?
The writer, who's named Salomon Trismosin, he says this passing phrase, which just blew my mind wide open. He says, "Hence it is clear that the gold of the philosophers is other than the common gold or silver, although some philosophers happen to compare it to these, and indeed to all metals."
All right, we are rolling, and I'm here with my friend MJDorian. How's it going this morning, brother?
Hey, Matt. Doing awesome. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on. Doing well. How about you?
Absolutely. Doing great. Yeah, thanks for the interest in coming on. I learned about you through our mutual friend, Michael Phillip. You know, I've been into all of these kind of alchemy ideas for over a decade. And I heard, you know, I saw one of his YouTube videos, and it said like Alchemy Explored and something along these lines with you as a guest, and I listened to it and I was blown away. So I was like, I need to follow this guy right now. And I ended up listening to a number of your podcasts, keeping up with you on IG, and yeah, it's been cool learning about you. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring you on here for, like learn your background, how you got into all of this stuff. You're kind of an expert on alchemy, on Jung, on all kind of stuff, you know, and I want to get into how this all began for you. And then I've got a number of questions as well to clarify my concepts on alchemy and beyond. So yeah, thanks for being here, man.
Great. Yeah, it's an honor and a pleasure. And anytime I get to just chat about this stuff that I nerd out about, oh, it's a joy.
Yep, likewise. So to kick it off, more or less, how did you find yourself interested in all of these ideas, you know, Western esotericism, alchemy? You know, how old were you when all of this stuff came on your radar, and like, how did this story unfold?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it has very much to do with just growing up being an art kid. The moment that I realized that I was the artsy kid in class who could draw, you know, the sooner you realize that, you know, you're this type of ant within the larger colony, then it gives you a certain amount of strength in a sense, because you accept your responsibility as a little bit of an outcast, and you then bring in all the things that go along with that. So I think anybody who's involved with the arts and creating on a regular basis, I think we're all naturally drawn to these more mysterious traditions, these esoteric traditions, especially when we first find out about them. And just especially because as an artist, you're drawn towards symbolism. And all of these traditions, whether it's alchemy, Kabbalah, Freemasonry, you know, Hermeticism, they're heavily, heavily symbolic and just like rich, overflowing with artwork and writings and poetry. And so as an artist, naturally you're like, what the hell is this? You know, what? How do I get into this? How do I understand it? And along the way, you start to see that it gives you a framework for existing and understanding reality itself. And, you know, how can that get any better, basically? So as a teenager, I started being drawn to these things for that reason.
Super cool. Glad to learn about that. So when did alchemy become like a focus? When did it kind of break off a little from art being the main focus to like more of this alchemy, Western esotericism kind of idea?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I was into Western esotericism and the traditions that go hand in hand with that before I was even into alchemy. Alchemy, for all those years, seemed like a very far-flung, just unreasonable pursuit, I would say.
Sure.
I saw it from the angle that most pop culture views it, which is that there were these people in the medieval era that were fixated on, trying to manipulate metals and possibly create gold. And what they were actually doing is still kind of a question mark. That's how I viewed it. But I did see that there was a wealth of symbolism there, and I've always loved alchemical woodcuts and the way they represent symbols and forms of the body there, and that's influenced my work even before I was into alchemy, my visual art. Mm-hmm. So the head first dive into alchemy came about 2 years ago now, when I started a series for my podcast, Creative Codex. I started a series specifically about Carl Jung and his obsession with alchemy. In the progress of that, 1 episode, 2 episodes, 3 episodes, 4 episodes in, I mean, it started to get its hooks in me, and I started to say, well, there's all these podcasts, all these people talking about alchemy this, alchemy that, approaching it only from really psychological angles. And I never heard anyone that was talking about, the benefits of calcination, whatever. I never heard anyone talking about doing the actual physical work. Yeah. Actually putting a piece of matter in an alembic, in a pot, boiling it, seeing what happens, going through the processes. And I was like, well, that's kind of not selling out, but it's disingenuous to talk about an art form. It's like talking about, thinking like you're an armchair MMA expert and never like going to take a class in jiu-jitsu,
Right.
It just doesn't work. So I said, you know what? I know of this particular course. It's called the Spagyrics by a French esotericist named Jean Dubuis. And I had done some of his work before. They're freely available online. And he was also an alchemist. He was, curiously enough, interviewed as a research source for the Harry Potter film. So he's in one of their special features.
Nice.
As like someone talking about alchemy. That's not where I found him, but just a curious side note. Mm-hmm. So he has these courses, and as I was doing the research for this Jung series, I was like, not only is this an amazing resource for his, quotes and what he sees alchemy is, but also he offers a very straightforward, step-by-step approach to how one would practice this and start doing some experiments yourself. Mm-hmm. And completely removed from all of the jargon and kind of double speak of the early alchemical treatises, which can be very notably difficult to get through and understand.
Sure.
So that was my way into it. It was this back door, and I started practicing it to feel like I could confidently speak about this thing, mm-hmm. whether I was speaking about it psychologically, spiritually, or physically. I wanted to feel it, get it under my fingernails, Right. And it's amazing, and it's become kind of a facet of my being in a sense, and I value it. I value it a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what I did find so interesting about your conversation with Michael, was because, you were talking about the actual physical alchemy and not just spiritual alchemy or mental alchemy, which we may get into today as well. But yeah, that seems so long misunderstood, long forgotten. Like, I feel like people see it as a myth or something. Like,
yeah,
did it even happen? Yeah, is there any proof that it happened? That's kind of one of my first questions, really. Dropping into the main meat of the conversation here is like, when we think of alchemy, almost everyone thinks lead to gold, some type of cheap base material that you transmute or augment in some way to make a more valuable material. You're making a quote unquote profit on the work. You're turning something very cheap into something very rare and expensive, or there's a few ways to look at it, right? But I wonder, and I want to ask you, was there any accounts of someone successfully transmuting lead to gold, or is that a metaphor, or is that a myth,
So yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful topic, and to approach it kind of objectively, I think is the right angle to take with it. So first, let's just kind of give a quick definition of like how we can view alchemy as a tradition of what it's attempting to do. So this is my personal definition after just studying, all these treatises and spending this much time with the tradition. I would say that alchemy is an esoteric spiritual tradition whose practice primarily centers around this idea of transforming or transmuting matter. And this is work that is often done in solitude in what would be a combination. It's usually thought of as your laboratory/oratory. It's a sacred space, but also this space for experiments. And during those processes, the alchemist is using the processes of nature on this piece of matter. So these aren't like new processes that alchemy has just invented out of thin air, that are foreign in some sense to the natural world. Alchemists, over thousands of years have observed, that these are the processes of nature using the four elements, and we can utilize those in almost like a microcosm in our furnace to cause the same changes, which have spiritual effects, essentially. So that's kind of just a quick perspective from which to view it. And then in terms of the actual, even just viewing it from that perspective, we have an unintentional answer to this lead to gold thing, that the idea of creating material wealth clearly from that perspective isn't really the focus. But this tradition, it held such a position of notoriety and importance in society throughout various centuries in Europe that there's a few different angles from which to see it. So during the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, alchemy was kind of just a commonplace practice and tradition within the fabric of European culture, to the point where the king of Prague, he was an alchemist, and he would commission and pay for alchemists to come to Prague and live in the castle so that they could continue their experiments, and they write treatises and basically teach him how to be a better alchemist. So during that time period, Prague was known as the City of Gold, partially for that reason. Wow. And there's evidence that shows that the king, he had a tunnel under the castle that directly gave him access to a specific alchemical laboratory in the Jewish sector of the city. And the Jewish people, especially the Kabbalists, were known at the time for being exceptional at alchemy, and the way they kind of fused that with the philosophy of Kabbalah, another esoteric tradition. So there's a lot of these spiritual aspects, and then you start to see in history that, well, royalty is super interested in it too. This idea of creating gold, as was so often mentioned in the treatises. And so you end up seeing edicts given down in certain countries that forbid the practice of alchemy, specifically because they didn't want people creating gold. They didn't want people, basically the same thing as, the government doesn't want you to be printing your own $100 bills in your home. So the governments of those times didn't want people creating new gold. And there was a very real concern. So then you say, okay, there's these people in royalty who are really fascinated by it. There's these people who are in spiritual traditions like Kabbalah who are really fascinated by it, clearly not interested in the material wealth side of things. Well, what do the treatises actually say? And then very rarely, very occasionally, you find something like this. So there's this beautiful treatise from the 1500s called Splendor Solis, one of the most celebrated ones. And because of its rich paintings that it has. I included these paintings on my website. If you go to mjdorian.com/alchemy and look at Splendor Solis.
Yeah, super cool
within
stuff.
this, yeah, it's mind altering, just sitting and staring at it for a while.
I
So
know.
within this text, towards the end, the writer, who's named Salomon Trismosin, he says this passing phrase, which just blew my mind wide open. He says, "Hence, it is clear that the gold of the philosophers is other than the common gold or silver, although some philosophers happen to compare it to these, and indeed to all metals." So, right there, like clear as day, somebody who's practicing alchemy, somebody who's known as kind of one of these masters who ends up being a teacher to Paracelsus even, he's saying, hence it is clear that the gold of the philosophers is other than the common gold or silver. There's the recognition that you may end up producing something that really does look like gold, because through these processes, you produce some incredible and strange and fascinating things in the solitude of your laboratory. But there's a recognition that this is something else. And maybe it's even better than gold because it's even more, it's spiritually pure, because through the process of these many procedures, you're supposed to be purifying matter and bringing out kind of the divine spark of it and such. And so perhaps you end up with something that's philosophically better than gold.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. So they made a law about don't do this because I guess they feared it was real and that people could start to create their own wealth type of a situation. This is kind of a direct question, but have you ever heard of any evidence of someone successfully creating actual real AU gold from anything? You know what I mean? Like, I hope AU is the right element, but I mean gold. Rather than looking like gold, because I can totally see people creating a bar of metal that looks like gold through chemistry, but I wonder, was it real gold, or could anyone tell the difference back then? That maybe there was no scientific testing to say like, no, it's not reading the right carbon or whatever would. Sure. I don't know.
I mean, there's two answers to that. One would be that in today's modern science, there is an understanding that it is possible to take lead and turn it into gold. This has to do with altering it on an atomic level. And it is possible. It is possible, but it ends up being so expensive to do that the transmission rate of what you get versus what you paid to cause that transformation is not worthwhile. But science has said that, okay, we'll give that to the alchemists, that it is atomically possible. But then there's this other point which has to do with that. This tradition is a heavily symbolic tradition, and it comes from a mythopoetic way of viewing the world. So when alchemists talk about gold, they're referring to several other things. They're referring to the energy of the sun. They're referring to fire. It's all tied in with this very heavily symbolic and meaningful way of seeing the world. Every single metal is associated with a specific planet that you can see with your visible eye. You're not supposed to perform certain operations unless unless the moon is either waxing or waning on a specific day of the week. Basically, it's all tied together with this mythopoetic way of viewing the world, and these correspondences that overlay, where one thing, like something like the word Mercury and the symbol for it, ends up meaning a whole universe of things, not just the element, the metal itself,
Right. Wow. That's profound. Wow. So it sounds to me like it was an esoteric tradition just as much as it was chemistry. And, as a fan of like yoga and, like the Vedic traditions, it becomes a lifestyle to live in this higher type of mind. It becomes a all consuming, for a lot of people, not everyone, but or at least for periods of time, and maybe we take a little break. That's me, for example. Like I have like these sprints of like I'm fully going ham in the spiritual world, and then I kind of like I'm going to take a little break and come back to the matrix for a little bit. So it's a balance. But I will say, once you get really into it and deep into it, and you start to see the benefits of like, wow, I'm feeling good. Like my mind is clear. Like I'm having success in life. I'm feeling creative, and I'm getting like, peptides, or I'm getting like good juice flowing through the body. I'm feeling great. Maybe your chakras are unlocking. You don't even know, because it's not in your tradition, or maybe your Kundalini is awakening, through all this like science that you're doing, and it's like staying so attuned to all the factors, like the astrology, like the attention to detail. Like some of these yogic postures that I do, they're so detailed. It's like hold your breath, pump your navel 26 times in, 26 times out, exhale, repeat 40 times, and you have to like remember all these details. It's almost right. That same way. It's like a recipe,
It's ritualistic. Yeah. There's power. There's a great, tremendous power in ritual, and all of these things. If we're just still talking about alchemy, like the tradition you're talking about, there's power in that ritual and what it does to you psychologically, even. Right. Forget even spiritually. Just behaving in a manner where you're doing choreographed actions with a specific symbolic intent that has an effect on you psychologically.
Yeah.
And it has an effect on your unconscious. And intent is a big thing in alchemy, let's say. So a lot of these treatises, including the work of Jean Dubuis, the French esotericist, will say things that are paradoxical. Like they'll say that the work that you do in front of you in the laboratory reflects work that is happening inside of you, in your consciousness. So your consciousness, if you're out of balance, out of whack while you're doing the work, it's going to have a negative effect on the matter that you're working on. And vice versa. What transformations happen in the matter is going to cause something to transform in the alchemist. And at first, this is like, well, how is this possible? Why would this function in the way it does? And it comes back to this idea of ritual, that ritual has a certain power on us. And so if we're doing something that's, I think in this case, let's say like, you take crushed plant, like one of the procedures tells you to do. In my case, I'm thinking lemon balm, which was one of the experiments. So you crush it up, you pulverize it in, mortar and pestle. Then you let it soak in cognac for about 2 weeks. And then the instructions tell you that you are not to take it out again to continue working on it until the moon is waning, waxing on on the first Thursday of the month. And so now I'm like, what? I don't even know how moon phases work.
Sure.
And then you end up looking it up, and then you're like, oh, it's every 29.5 days is a moon cycle. Oh, it's always going from right to left. And then in the process of trying to do these, very choreographed actions, you end up realizing that you are choreographing your own like being to the universe, to the world around you, to these enormous structures that have been going and going, like clockwork for millennia. And people used to choreograph everything from, their harvest to their day-to-day lives around, but we stopped doing that. But there's tremendous like a centering effect and a balancing effect to your inner energies and your psychology that happens when you feel like I'm coordinated with the universe right now. Like who can say that, right? Well,
right.
Alchemists can say that. I'm coordinated with the actions and the movements of the universe.
In harmony with nature.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That's why they're using nature's processes. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's a way to find a union with the universe. Again, to call back to yoga, that's what it means, union. It means yoke or something, which is some type of like bringing together or union. But it made me think there when you were talking about, the paradoxical statement of, your internal state will affect the external and vice versa. Is that right? Is that kind of what you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is what, as above, so below, as within, so without in alchemy means.
Absolutely. Yeah, that brought two things to mind. we don't really have to get super deep into, but for people that listen to my podcast, know I'm going to bring up probably, which is like psychedelics. If your set and setting is bad, it's going to go bad, and if your set and setting is good, there's a high likely chance it's going to go good. So that internal state, even though you're taking something external, it's literally like a material that you're putting into you. If your internal state is out of whack, what manifests from that is going to be out of whack. If your internal state is in balance or union or harmony with nature, all these words we're using, potentially, more likely, your experience is going to be more of that flow. Similar thing with Kundalini and Kundalini awakening or spiritual awakening of any sort. If your life is kind of like all over and it's haywire and it's like there's a lot of friction going on, it's really probably not a good time to awaken your Kundalini or awaken spiritually to like the higher realms, because that chaos in your mind and your life is you're not ready for it, So I always recommend people, if they're ever going to try these things, like get your ducks in a row, clean out your house, clean out your mind, meditate, all these things, because that external, internal thing, is very real. It's very real. So it's just funny that so many traditions are almost doing a very similar thing, but in a different method,
Yeah, no, and it goes back to these theories and these insights from Jungian psychology. So Jung and one of his students and colleagues, Marie-Louise von Franz, a number of times they say something that always blows my mind, which is this idea that everything around us is a projection of our own mind. So this is the most basic example. If you're going onto, let's say, a bus and there's the bus driver, you've never met them before, you don't know anything about them. And so, but immediately, because there is this void of information, of anything tangible about this person in front of you, you immediately start projecting things onto them. Whether it's the color of their skin, whether it's the way they're dressed, whether it's how many rings they're wearing, whether it's the color of their hair, whether it's if they're, wearing a certain kind of shoe that you are familiar with or no. And without fail, if there's this void of information, our mind will start projecting onto this person, and then we make a judgment call based on that. Right? This is just a fact of life. We do this constantly, like 100 times a day. And then it's only afterward, once we've come to know that person, that we then have to course correct and make a different judgment about them. But this is happening not only with people. What's wild is that it's happening with everything around us.
Yeah.
From, the items around us, our objects, our devices, the people, the animals. If you look back, thousands of years behind us, when those cultures would look at animals, that's why their stories are so full of these animals and totems and spirit animals and such, because their minds were naturally already doing that. We started to kind of strip that off of ourselves as we became, the rationalist movements started and stuff. But the idea being that even in cultures like Hinduism and Buddhism, the reality is seen as an illusion, and that's partially true. Because most of the time, what we're interacting with is our own mind. We're not interacting and seeing things truly objectively. We're really just dancing with ourselves.
I can't agree more. Yeah, I talk about that all the time on the show, and that's why things like for myself, psychedelics, the spiritual path, meditation, yoga, these things bring me into a better balance. And I think life's about balance. It's not about one end or the other, one extreme or the other. It's like I'm not all the way enlightened, but I'm not unenlightened. You know what I mean? It's like there's some, balance, and I feel like it tilts me in the direction of that other way, because otherwise we are projecting, we're causing our own issues unbeknownst to ourselves by not seeing more clearly. Again, these things help me see more clearly, and so to be at one with what is the Tao, it's an ongoing effort. It's not just easy to do, but as we find it as a lifestyle, as a personal practice, I think we get more attuned, to that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to respond to that before I move on?
Yeah. I mean, there's another direct quote I can add to kind of buffer these ideas, which would be that. So, what did Jung see in alchemy that really drew him? That obsessed him about it, and part of it was it was a confirmation of all of his suspicions about the mind. And the one I'm going to refer to in what we're talking about is this idea that we're constantly projecting, and what we see in the exterior world is our own mind, like, talking back to us. And so there's an effect of, like, let's say if you are practicing something like alchemy, and you're boiling ash, let's say, which is a process I've done. And the idea is all these consecutive processes are done usually several times in a row, and they're meant to be purifying the matter so you can continue working with it, or separate the matter and then bring it back together. And so you're doing something like boiling ash, which is just an insane procedure. It's like, I have to go pick up my daughter from school in an hour. Someone's going to ask me, "Oh, what did you do this afternoon?" So I first burned down this plant matter until it was black ash, and then I'd spend another hour burning it down until it became white ash, and then I submerged it in water and I boiled the water until the ash kind of like purified a little more. And they're like, "What?" Like, call the mental institution. What are you doing? But in the process of, doing something that's relatively abstract and ambiguous, your mind inevitably starts to project its own contents onto it. Yeah. So Jung had this beautiful quote I found in one of his books about alchemy, where he says, "In the darkness of anything external to me, I find, without recognizing it as such, an interior or psychic life that is my own." So when you look at a painting, a mandala, that is ambiguous to you, that you don't know what tradition it's from or what the artist intended, you start to pull out insights from your own unconscious. And that's really how art works. When we watch a film by David Lynch and then we feel emotionally moved and then we don't know why, it's because there's something under the surface that the art is calling out of us from our own experiences, that we're then reacting to our own unconscious. And so this is partially what alchemy confirms, the idea that you're doing these very ambiguous procedures, but in the process, you start to have personal and psychological realizations that you note down in your journal, and you want to note down everything like a good esotericist so you can review it later. And so it's a mixture of like your personal insights and the actual physical procedures you're doing. Wow. So I just wanted to mention that.
That is profound. Wow. I love that. I was about to go somewhere else with it, but I actually did write this question: is art alchemy? It's a different type of alchemy. Maybe it's more of the mental, spiritual alchemy. I'm not certain, but I'm friends with a number of visionary artists, and when you see it, it's ineffable. It's incredible. I mean, I wish you could really see that painting back there. It's kind of far away, but good friend of mine, Payson Jones, The Art of Waking Up. It's like, how do you even dream this shit up, bro? Like it takes me somewhere just by looking at it. But it's almost like he's transmuting some experience, this cosmic experience, into tangible, physical. So it is bringing something in. I guess not nothing into something, but something into something else. It's a transmutation. It's the experience, or the non-physical, into the physical rendering of a painting. Similar thing with music. What inspires us to create? We just hear a riff in our head. It doesn't exist, but we bring it into existence. We just start hearing drums. Boom, boom. Wow, I want to write that. I want to record that. It's like, it's coming from the subconscious or the mind or the psyche, and we're bringing it into existence. It's nothing to something, or I don't want to call experience nothing, but you know what I mean? So on a general scale, is art alchemy?
Yeah, it reminds me of this wonderful quote I recently stumbled on in an interview with David Bowie. And he says something that just, again, it's sometimes just these passing things people say that blow your mind. So he said, the interview is asking him about, his experience as an artist and such. And in the background, you see his paintings that he's done that no one ever knows about, you focus on his music so much and his singing. And then he says, he's basically riffing on this idea of like, well, what makes artists different than everybody else? Why do artists exist, and why do they end up creating, meaningful works? And he says that in his view, there's nothing tangibly different about an artist versus anyone who's not involved in, creative tasks. The one thing that he would say is a distinction is that artists, they see a world of possibility instead, that they see that matter is a workable substance, that you can take matter and make it do some other stuff, that it's not just there and then you can enjoy it or disregard it. To anybody who's an artist, that you've had this experience when you can take a piece of paper and rearrange it, or take this crayon or paint, and you're basically just constantly rearranging things into new things, right? So this idea that matter is a workable substance, now that dovetails very well with what alchemists do, and partially that's maybe why alchemy is called an art, that you're using matter for spiritual ends, basically, in that regard.
So is it that alchemy is just a really good metaphor for the artistic process, or is it alchemy in a sense? I
mean, you have to have the two traditions be separate because they do separate things,
I see.
But
so art is like alchemy, but alchemy is an art. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're both like each other, right?
Right. Okay.
One in some, well, because when we go back, let's say if we keep distilling these ideas down and down and down and down, the premises of alchemy are basically core inclinations of what it is to be human. If you were to strip away, let's say if we hit the reset button on all of culture, civilization around the world, God forbid some grand disaster would happen, and we lost everything and we had to restart. One of the first things people would do is they would take fire and they would take items, pieces of matter, and they would see what happens when you put them together. And they would notice that when you heat water, it disappears. Where does it go? What is this?
Right.
It's the element of fire, heating the element of water, and water becoming air. And so then you start to rediscover, like, oh, there's these elements that the world around me seems to function in. And so all of these ways we engage with the world around us and matter and everything, it's our natural inclination, basically. It's like hardwired into us. And it's only through, centuries and thousands of years of civilization building on top of that and kind of building up other programs, other operating systems, that we get distracted into these other modes of thinking.
I see. Yeah, I love that. Well, we could go down that rabbit hole forever, but I do have a bunch of other questions I want to get to. But essentially, the next topic was like the Philosopher's Stone. Is that the same thing as turning lead to gold, or is that a completely different thing or effort to create some type of material that, I guess what they say is it gives you immortality,
I mean, there's different interpretations of the Philosopher's Stone. The tricky thing with trying to read and be a student of alchemy in general is that the treatises that people write over these, centuries of time, but mostly in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, what means one thing to one alchemist can mean something completely different to another one. So when one alchemist refers to salt, mercury, or sulfur, what they're referring to by using those terms can be something completely different than what another one, a continent away, is doing. And part of that has to do with naturally the solitary nature of the work, that you're not gathering together in a club and doing alchemy with your buddy. You're really sitting by yourself and following certain processes that you're reading from a treatise and then doing experiments of your own, and in the process, having your own discoveries. So this idea of the Philosopher's Stone, it's still very much tied up with its own sense of mystery in paradox. One way to understand it that I've seen is that once you realize something like the Philosopher's Stone, that piece of matter is like the ultimate alkahest. And basically it's able to...
What does that word mean? Alkahest.
It's something that dissolves bonds between things.
Okay.
And so you can then use this thing that looks like a stone, but it's really most likely a very purified, dense piece of matter, usually a metal, that you've done hundreds of processes on. And so something about that piece of matter can then be used to dissolve any other substance, basically create any other operation that you need to use it for in the lab. So basically it becomes like this ultimate substance of alchemy. So that's one way to see the Philosopher's Stone. There's other aspects that are like, that have to do with tinctures, or more commonly known as potions. So this is usually a practice that you first learn in spagyrics when you're just working with plants. And even in those initial stages of alchemy, when you're only working with plants, not metals, you're creating tinctures that you're meant to imbibe, and they're supposed to have spiritual, psychological benefits to you. And those are often also related to stones that you create, and they're called stones.
Wow.
So that's really as far as I've gotten with that.
Right. It makes me think that they could create a stone, like something that looks like this, but like nature made this, but humans made that stone. And then people believe these things have metaphysical properties. That's up to you to decide. Maybe it's kind of like that. It's like, I made this thing, and I believe it's got a metaphysical property. And when I carry it around, I'm noticing synchronicities. Like maybe it puts them in some type of high vibe the way crystals do, perhaps. Is like, could that be the Philosopher's Stone in some sense?
I think you're onto something in regarding this idea that nature creates these things that are crystals and stones. And when we look at back in time alchemy is essentially, at least in its current iteration, a 2,000-year-old tradition. It outlasts any of the other Western esoteric traditions in that regard. But the way alchemists have viewed the way nature works for most of those centuries is that in the you could say the furnace of the earth, nature is taking imperfect metals like lead and progressively over the course of centuries perfecting them into metals like gold and silver. And that it's nature's natural processes that do that, which usually involve intense heat, combustion and intense pressure, and these kinds of processes. Then the alchemists say, well, in our furnace are the various processes that we have as alchemists, we can replicate nature's processes that usually take centuries to only take a year, let's say, or months. And so we can do the same things nature can. And that's part of like the romantic view of alchemy, that you're accelerating nature in a sense in your alembic, in your laboratory.
Wow, I love that. Oh man, I wish I knew. Maybe in a second I could text my friend. Who knows if he'll get back to me or not. But he gave me this stone, little black stone. He called it the Philosopher's Stone. But it's just this very light. It's like, it's lighter than it looks because it looks thick. Man, I really wish I knew what it was called.
Yeah, so like, let's say that there's this idea that we can intuitively sense that some object or stone or crystal is somehow distinct from other things, and like you can't really put your finger on why, right? If we follow that thread, there's a parallel idea in alchemy which you're taught to work with directly through these courses and treatises, and it goes back to the three principles of alchemy, which are salt, mercury, and sulfur. So on the face value, salt, mercury, and sulfur, they sound like they just refer to, minerals and elements or metals. But each one of those symbols, again, has a wealth of meaning and several different interpretations. So the way an alchemist is taught to view matter is that everything has a salt, a mercury, and a sulfur. And what does that mean? Well, salt is the densest, most physical aspect of a thing. So let's say if you pulverize a plant, you dry it out, and then you calcinate it in a pot, and it's reduced to just black ash, and then you calcinate it further, it's reduced to white ash. So you've reduced that plant to its salt, essentially. It's down to its most base element of matter, and in a sense you've also been purifying it during that process. Now you can still work with that, and a lot of processes involve ash for that reason, because it's seen as the salt, the most pure basic form of matter. But there's these two other principles, which are mercury and sulfur, and that's where the really fascinating philosophical stuff comes into play. So not only do we have this base physical form that we can see, but that there are these other two. The mercury represents the spirit of a thing, and the sulfur represents the soul. And so an alchemist would say that as chemistry evolved separate from alchemy, and then science became what it is today, science and modern medicine, by extension, only addresses the salt of everything. It's only the physical thing. It's only the symptom that we can see. It's only the issue that is present in front of us in its physical form.
Wow.
Alchemy has always been interested in these other two also. This kind of like these three dimensions of seeing all matter and all living things, that there's also this spirit and the soul of a thing. And in the process of working with matter, you are engaging with those things specifically. So there's you're trying to separate out the spirit and the soul. That's why you see sometimes these really fascinating shapes of some of these old alchemical this equipment. There's the pelican, which has it's a glass center with these two arms on the side. It's specifically only for alchemy.
Wow.
There's different distillation tubes and such. All of that, the whole purpose is to separate out the salt, the mercury, and the sulfur. So you have the spirit that's associated with often the alcohol of a substance, and then there's the oil, which is associated with the sulfur or the soul of a substance. So it's this whole other dimension of seeing things.
Wow. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that artwork, because to me it reads as visionary artwork. Would you agree with that?
Are we talking Splendor Solis or which one?
Well, I'm remembering, if I'm remembering the same drawing or painting or whatever it was that you were talking about with that glass that you just mentioned.
Oh, the Ripley scroll. Oh, yeah, the Ripley scroll. If that's the one, it does have a central pelican.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone Googles alchemy art, you'll see a number of stuff pop up. I mean, you mentioned it on your site too, but it's just like, is this a coded recipe? Is this an experiential report of like alchemy going successfully? Is it just an artistic depiction and nothing more? Like the alchemy art is so puzzling but surreal, but also it calls to your soul. You were mentioning your soul, and it speaks to some deep part of you. What would you say about that?
Well, no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has to do with this idea that the further back you look, we see more and more of this kind of mythopoetic thread of viewing the world. All of these traditions, especially esoteric traditions, you look at something like Kabbalah, items that you see, people that you see, animals that you see, they're not just the physical thing. They're also these correspondences. They match up with certain planets. They match up with certain stories, myths, and gods. And so there's this idea that...
You see that? Is that the thing? Is that the glass thing?
Yeah, that's one of them. I think that might be from Splendor Solis. Yeah. That wasn't the pelican glass, but yeah, that's one, like a vial that is being used to probably store
Right.
one of the
and
liquids
like, and
that,
like
that you've
this
been working
one.
on. The peacock was above it, yeah. Yeah. The combination of masculine and feminine. Yeah, that's a huge symbol all throughout alchemical art.
Right, but that's
Also
like,
represented as
it's
the marriage of
visionary.
sun and moon. Oh,
Absolutely.
totally, yeah. It's, absolutely, man.
I love it.
It's this idea that, matter is imbued with myth and the gods speak to you in dreams. This is the way humans have been functioning for all of our existence. It's only in very recent memory that we've shifted away from that, and I think it's to our own detriment, because you look at the world and there's kind of this loss of a sense of meaning to things, and a dissociation from matter. What do we do with matter? What is our relationship to matter? Are you at odds with it? Do you just use it for your own pleasure? This is something that alchemy directly addresses. It teaches you that no, you're an active force of change with matter. You're a force of nature, and it's one of these things that is lost as we strip away these kind of esoteric traditions.
Right. It does bring me to the question, as above, so below. I have like a basic understanding as to what that means, but there's probably levels to it. I mean, I guess what I think of when I think of as above, so below is like systems are fractal. So like star systems, look away and do a thing, and atoms look away and do a thing. Like one is infinitely large and ever expanding, and one is infinitely small and ever contracting. I mean, when you get down to quantum, it's like you can't even really explain it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also an endlessly fascinating term. As above, so below, as within, so without. I would imagine that phrase itself initially comes from something called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which is a core text of alchemy, of early alchemical work. And it's one of these that alchemists for centuries have been translating and reinterpreting with the understanding that in there is the secret of the work, basically. That within this text is contained everything you need to know about your alchemical processes. And so again, this common phrase, it traces all the way back down to this tradition. So one way of interpreting it would be like, if you look at just the procedures of alchemy, the 7 metals that you classically work with, which are lead, tin, iron, copper, mercury, silver, and gold, each of those associate with a specific planet. That's one of the classic 7 planets that's visible with the naked eye. The moon being included among them. Obviously, it's a moon, not a planet, but classical terms we're talking. And so there's this concept of correspondences. So when you're working with a specific metal, you're supposed to make sure that your procedure corresponds with a certain moment, that the solar system is aligned, that would make it most beneficial for that procedure. So there's that aspect of looking at it. The idea of like, well, there's this way of seeing our relation to the universe that we've lost, and that phrase explains our relationship. I'm sure that if you go to ancient Egypt, it would have a very similar understanding of, or the Mayan civilization, our relationship to our solar system. And as above, so below. What's up there should be mirrored down here, or is being mirrored in some fashion.
Wow.
And then there's the as within, so without, which I think directly addresses this problem of the psyche and matter, that there's a relationship there, and we see that playing out in moments in our lives that we can label as synchronicities, which are just unexplainable, profound coincidences that we've all at some point had, or premonitory dreams, where it seems like our unconscious, for one reason or another, seems to understand what's going on in the exterior world,
Right.
and tells us about something that's about to happen. And there's so much documented about these kinds of things, and I think those two kind of go hand in hand in explaining, at least how I view it, that as within, so without, as above, so below.
Absolutely. I believe in that. I've talked time and time again about how I've had precognitions in dreams.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're really cool and sometimes they're really mundane, but it's definitely like, I totally dreamt about this last night or the night before, and now it's happening.
Right.
Like, that is crazy. I mean, you kind of just addressed it, but is there any, like, does that happen to you?
I haven't had as much premonitory dreams. I have had, moments where things, scenes, experiences in my dream life have happened that were just as important to me as in real life.
Totally.
Like where they were just as consequential. So, for example, one of my best friends passed away a number of years ago, and his death was very sudden, unexpected, and he left behind his wife and their 7-year-old son, and we were very close with them. And so, following his death, it was very traumatic for everyone. And in those months that followed, he visited all of us in our dreams. He visited myself, his wife, and their son.
Wow.
Regularly.
Yeah.
He would, in his son's dreams, he would just do domestic things. He would just be cooking dinner and giving it to his son. And then he would tell him, hey, you know what? I think you and mom should go to the beach next weekend. He would just tell him like really basic stuff, like domestic stuff.
Wow.
In my own dreams, he comforted me. He would hug me. We would talk about life, and he even asked if I could still do one more favor for him. And this ended up proving true in real life because his wife asked me to finish a painting of his that he had been working on for her birthday. And he hadn't finished it. It was a painting of Persephone. And so I ended up working on that. And that was one of, the final favors I still had to do for him. So it's like, yeah, man, dreams.
Jeez, what a world, man. I'm just glad we know about this stuff because, I mean, prior to all this, life was kind of dull, It was kind of like, man, I'm just here to go to school and fucking play video games. That's it, It's like, man. This is wild. That's so cool. That's so cool. I love the idea of dreams. And I agree with what you said and about how there's some of them hit you in a place we can't be hit normally in normal thinking. It's like, like we have a blind spot or a bias or a denial or something in our conscious mind, but in a dream it'll come through and you'll get the message. It's almost like that film Inception. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
It's like the deeper in the dream you go, the better the idea, the more profound the idea, that you bring it back and you're like, whoa, I have a gem. I just discovered a gem in the dream.
Totally.
And that's when I write in my dream journal. I don't write in it all the time, but sometimes when it's like a gem, I'm like, okay, I can't forget that, so I'm gonna write it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever hear music?
Yes.
On your way into sleeping, you do?
Oh no. Okay,
what's up with that?
So tell me about that. But real quick, I'll share that I've heard new songs that aren't songs in my dream, and I wake up and I do a voice note and I'll sing it or whatever. Nice. Yeah,
I don't know what that is, but it happens to me sometimes too, and I treasure it whenever it happens.
Right.
Sometimes I take a daily nap. It's basically made me a biphasic sleeper. Like if I don't have my nap, then I'm a zombie, even if it's just a 20-minute nap. But in the process of drifting off during my nap, sometimes either an image or music will come to me, and then I'm like, damn it, I have to wake up now and like voice memo this, like what you're saying, or just write it down really quick, or an insight, because I know that if I don't, it's going to disappear. It won't make it across that threshold of dreaming and waking again.
Absolutely.
And it can be so vivid, some of these, in terms of like the music that I'm hearing, where, it's like full orchestration, you got all the instruments of the band playing, somebody singing.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow, I've never heard this before. This sounds amazing.
1000%. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it comes in the dream and it feels like a deeper way, especially because as a musician, so many times I show up to the studio and get into the mic and I'm like, I'm drawing a blank, man. Like, can't think of nothing to say right now, but in the dream, it's like a full song, verse, chorus, words lined out. A couple of times, not many, maybe 3 times, I was able to like capture the full thing.
Wow.
And then hum the melody that was happening and hum the beat. And I'll just like talk to myself like, all right, so the beat goes boom, 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 and then the melody was like, and then.
It's wild. It's wild how that happens. And sometimes it's like an idea that you wouldn't normally think of, or an image that you normally wouldn't think of. One time I was anytime I go get a tattoo, I think of it as a very significant like ritual experience. So I rarely get tattoos, but when I do, like I know I've chosen the symbol, I've maybe drawn it myself, and the artist that I choose also, I have to feel something there for them. So I was going to get this tattoo once, and the night before the tattoo, as I laid down in my bed, I started drifting off, and then for whatever reason, I said in my mind this tattoo artist's name, like just I wanted to like speak it into my mind as I was falling asleep. And then as I did so, I'm in this what would be called the hypnagogic state. An image just fully formed appeared in front of me, which was like a staff with a flame on top, kind of like a torch, what looked like serpents spinning around it, and 2 eagle heads on the top with the wings in the back, kind of like a Mercury's caduceus, but it's a variation of it, and a crown on top, like almost like an ethereal, like see-through crown. And I was like, whoa, what was that? And so I went over and I wrote down what I saw, and then the next day I drew it and I showed it to the tattoo artist. Like, I saw this in my mind's eye, like I didn't will it, I just said your name, and then she was so moved by it, she was like, can I get that like on a shirt or something? And so I ended up setting it up so that she can buy it as a shirt, and then like she has the shirt of the symbol because she found it to be very meaningful for herself.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. So in your podcast, I heard about the secret of the golden flower poem. It is something that I had heard many years ago, and I mean, I'm pretty sure I was recommended it by someone saying this will change your life. This book will blow you away. And I remember, I think I listened to the audiobook probably twice. The version I heard was short. I was researching it in preparation for this, and it looks like there's like a 5-hour audiobook, which maybe I wonder if they're breaking it down or something. But I didn't get to listen to it. But there was also like a 40-minute version, and I remember it more like that. Like it was kind of like a really potent, shorter book. But in it, they're talking about internal alchemy, spiritual immortality. It's like a Taoist text, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Apparently it affected Jung in a massive way. Like he stopped writing the Red Book for a long time because he was so impacted by it. And he wanted to like divert and like study alchemy based on hearing this book, The Secret of the Golden Flower. They mentioned something about like a golden pill, which is essentially like a philosopher's stone of sorts. But it's all like internal. It seemed like it was more internal alchemy work, kind of almost yoga, but it's like self purification, meditation, stepping away from the work of life and like sitting in the presence of self or consciousness. And it really reminds me of yoga in a sense. But I was curious your thoughts on it. And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Jung's history, it becomes a really important text for him because he's working on this thing, called the Red Book, which are his visionary experiences during these meditations where he's digging into himself and interacting with unconscious contents, and some would even say spiritual experiences. And in the process, he's working on this thing for 16 years. And then a friend of his sends him the text of The Secret of the Golden Flower and asks him, can he write the foreword for the book that they're going to release of this, new translation of it. And he starts reading it, and the things he notices in it basically confirm all these intuitions and suspicions that he's having about his own experiences in these visionary states and writing the Red Book. And so it takes him completely off track, and he basically stops his Red Book project. He continues having his meditations, and he continues writing them down in his personal journals, but he stops doing this kind of illuminated manuscript style with the paintings and stuff. And so he mentions, here's one quote from him: "I devoured the manuscript at once, for the text gave me undreamed of confirmation of my ideas about the mandala and the circumambulation of the center." Around this time, he had also done certain artworks, and the text basically confirmed, some of the things symbolically that he was also exploring. And he ends up trying to figure out, where is this text coming from? What is this tradition? And that's how he stumbles on alchemy, because the text belongs to a tradition of Chinese inner alchemy, which folds under the umbrella of Taoism.
Yeah. And it was
in terms of the
founded
text,
by the people that I based my name on, Matt Xian.
Oh, no way.
Sorry to interrupt. It's just funny that I'm so in awe by the ancient Taoists, for sure. I feel some type of connection to them, like if there were past lives. Okay,
yeah, there you go. Something to dig into. Yeah, I mean, we each have those kind of intuitive threads that are pulling us in certain directions, and that might be one of them for you, for sure, for sure. And a part of this Taoist text, The Secret of the Golden Flower, what I found interesting about it is that when I first stumbled on it through working on this series of Jung, I was like, okay, let me read this thing, and I'll maybe try to create a guided meditation out of this text, because people will think that's really engaging, considering this is kind of what Jung was into at the time. But what I found was, and it was confirmed by other people who are scholars that study it, is that it was clearly a text written as a supplemental text for a tradition that you're actually being taught in person. So you have a teacher, or you're at one of these temples, and they're teaching you something step by step. And then this text is supplemental material that reinforces some of these ideas, but on its own, it doesn't have enough information for you to understand all the exact steps. It has a lot of cool stuff that is very much in line with what good meditation practices look like phrases like, whenever you sit, you should quiet your mind and unify your energy. Things like, how is the mind quieted? The mechanism is in the breathing. But the mind alone knows you are breathing out and will not let the ears hear. When you don't hear it, the breathing is fine. And when the breathing is fine, the mind is clear. Like, okay, that's a great tip. When you're breathing and your breathing is like heaving, then you're probably not going to get into the right meditative state. But if your breathing is smooth and you can't hear it, then you're going to get there. So it's full of those kinds of things that are helpful. But then things that Jung saw in it that, resonated with him was like, it'll say things like that you have to sit and observe your thoughts as if they're passing like a cloud. Even your emotions, that things will just pass through you. And this is something very much spoken about in Jungian psychology, which is that your thoughts and your moods, they happen to you. You don't really even cause them. They just happen. And seeing them objectively like this is very helpful for therapy, because then you can talk about them as if it's a problem up here rather than in here.
Absolutely.
And you can handle it.
The weather.
So there's elements of that. Yeah. And then there's also alchemical aspects. They talk about the unification of the sun and moon in there, and they talk about certain elements like fire and water. So that really got Jung's attention, and he hadn't known about alchemy beforehand, and so that became the rabbit hole through which he kind of fell for the rest of his life, and became fixated on this idea of alchemy.
Right. Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, that sheds a lot of light. Luckily, my friend Harold got back to me and told me about
go on, the stone?
Yeah, the stone. It's called a Cintamani stone. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Cintamani. Here's a picture of many of them. Let's see.
Ooh.
So, like I said, little egg thing, black little egg. There's one. It kind of looks like moldavite right there, but it's not quite moldavite. I am wearing moldavite. I love moldavites right there. Boom. But
Nice.
but let me just read what it is. I mean, there's a Wikipedia wish fulfilling jewel. Let's see. Cintamani, also spelled Chintamani or Chintamani stone, is a wish fulfilling jewel resembling a pearl, described in the Hindu and Mahayana Buddhist traditions. It is one of several Mani jewel images found in Buddhist scriptures. Oh, it shows a Buddha holding the stone right here. Check that out.
Very cool.
It's like a Buddha statue holding it. It is like a little egg. In Buddhism, it is held by bodhisattvas, divine beings with great compassion, wisdom, and power. It doesn't say anything about Philosopher's Stone, but I mean, it kind of sounds like it, right?
Sure.
Wish-fulfilling stone.
If you treat it as one, it'll make you feel pretty special walking around.
Absolutely.
Change your energy a bit in that regard. Intent is a big thing.
Yeah. 1000%. On top of Google here, it says, what is the power of Chintamani to aid the profound awakening and healing within the beholder? Is the Chintamani stone real? It is a legendary mystical gem called the wish-fulfilling stone. So y'all look that up. They don't look that expensive if y'all want to fulfill all your wishes. So shout out, Harold. All right, brother. But I have one more question, and then we'll wrap it. But kind of it was about bringing this all back down to earth and stuff. We've been exploring these amazing spaces out here, and maybe it is all on earth. Maybe I'm underplaying it, but it essentially, like, if someone wanted to practice alchemy in today's age, what is like a simple experiment that they could do that's not going to make them, scour the earth for rare materials like you do in video games? But
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder, because I myself, I'm into all this stuff, and I would love to just, be able to call to it, if I'm just in the mood. It's like, I want to do some alchemy right now, like, and not the spiritual type, the mental type, but the actual physical type. So I was curious, what would you say is like kind of an entry level alchemical process?
Sure. So I'll give one or two short, very basic experiments, but I'll try to bookend it by saying that there's a specific course and a book that you can get if you're curious about diving more into this stuff. So there's a book called Practical Alchemy by Brian Cotnoir, and it's very short. It's amazingly concise and short for how much it tells you and gives you. And that's a wonderful introduction to like the idea of physical alchemy. And of course, with all of the associations that come with that and the psychological and spiritual benefits of it. Then in terms of like, if you really want to get into it, there's the free course by the French esotericist Jean Dubuis. So in French, Jean, last name Dubuis. And this is the course that I've been working on, starting specifically with spagyrics, which Spagyyrics, freely available online. If you just look up any of that, his name and alchemy course, it'll link to his website, because one of his last will and testaments were that when he dies, he wants these courses to be freely available for anybody who wants to do them.
Nice.
So you can find them, you don't have to pay for it.
Wow.
And honestly, these are worth their weight in the Philosopher's Stone.
The Chintamani.
These are amazing.
I love it.
Yeah, these are one of the greatest gifts I've ever stumbled upon in terms of just esoteric practices that you can actually get your hands on. So there's that. And now in terms of, like, let's say a low level, very beginner friendly thing you can do that anybody can do without any other materials. So most people will have at least a pot for their kitchen, you know, like let's say one of the black cooking pots that you could make rice in. So it's better if it's black, so because it gives you certain visuals that happen next. You know, put that on your stove, fill it less than halfway full of water. So it's maybe a cup or so, maybe 2 cups. And instead of putting something in it, instead of cooking, instead of using it for, you know, just your automatic daily routine, just set the fire on it so it starts to warm up. You could set it on high and just stand over it. Obviously at a safe distance. You know, alchemy can be dangerous, so you don't want to put your face in there, but just so you can see what's going on inside this pot. At first, you're going to see nothing. It's just going to be black, right? This is one of those things where you go about your day, you don't think about it. Little by little, as a minute, 2 minutes go by, see if you can notice the first bubble forming, first little pocket of air. And as it progresses, before it gets to like this big boil, you'll start to see really incredible patterns going on in there. At one moment, before the bubbles get big on the lining of the pot, you'll see what looks like thousands of microscopic bubbles, and then those grow, and then eventually they become like reptile scales that like overlap with one another, and then those turn into kind of like fish eyes that then start to come up.
Wow.
Because of the color of the pot and everything, and it becomes like this whole experience. And all you're really watching is just one element, which is fire, you know, using heat to cause this other element of water to become air in front of you. And then you can even marvel at this idea of like, eventually, after about 10, 15 minutes, this water no longer exists because now, you know, you've transmuted it into the air inside of the room. And even just something that simple, I think, when it's done with the right intent, you know, you're not doing it absentmindedly to cook. You're just watching it, observing it, understanding how matter is behaving in front of you. I think that teaches you something, even in that moment, that you've caused something to take place in front of you.
Right. I love that.
Now, another quick little experiment after that, another day, would be making tea. It seems so simple, so absent-minded that we usually do, you know, but what you're doing with tea is you're using all 4 of the basic elements, because you have the fire, you have the water that you have to heat, you have the air that's some of the water is becoming, and then you also, earth is the plant matter that's within the tea bag. So as that is heated, again, through something similar to a process of calcination, the boiling water, you're causing the essence of the earth to leach out into the water. And this is also one of the common natural processes, you know, alchemists use. And then you drink it. You're drinking like the essence of that earth that you were working with. And we do this, you know, some of us on a daily basis. But that can be seen as, you know, a little tiny kind of piece of alchemy.
Absolutely. Yeah, what that brings to mind is how, for myself, you know, on a psychedelic experience, even just a microdose, like I see like magic all around. It's right beneath our nose. It's right beneath our nose. It's happening around us all the time. It's making tea, you know? It's like we take it all for granted. We get accustomed or, you know, desensitized or whatever to all this magic around us at all times. So I love that. It's that simple, you know, like that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And last question kind of, is about the tinctures and stuff. Like I've seen people like, at festivals, like selling, you know, like little bottles where they've put rose petals and they've put, you know, you probably know more about it than I do, but, that's alchemy too, I feel like. Is that right?
I mean, it's not alchemy unless the processes that were used were separating the parts of the matter out and purifying it.
Okay.
So, you know, if you were taking these elements that you're working with, whether it's plant matter, whether it's metal, and separating it out to its base components, like vapor, the salt, which is the ash, the oil, the alcohol, and all those elements, and then you purify those separately in alchemy, and then you join them back together to create the tincture. And so what you end up imbibing, if you're joining them back together to their original form, is something that's been basically, it's brought its divine spark back into form. So it doesn't have the impurities anymore, and now it's like symbolically and physically incredibly purified.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that gives me a really good idea, man. And yeah, again, I'm sure a million more questions are gonna come up, and hopefully we do this again sometime, man, because it's been an honor having you, brother.
Absolutely. It's been a joy chatting about all this stuff that I rarely get into, because I kind of am in so much have my head in creative figures and creative geniuses with the show that I do, Creative Codex, that all this stuff that is very much a passion of mine, I'm really happy to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was my last thing. I was going to say, please invite the listeners to where to discover you, your podcast, your website, a small kind of like bio as to what you get into, and then we'll wrap it.
Yeah, so my podcast is Creative Codex, Codex. That's the Latin name for like an old-fashioned book, where like a tome of knowledge.
I've always loved that word.
And yeah, it's such a good word. And so on that show, I mainly focus on creative figures, creative geniuses throughout time. And but I've done a number of these series within the show about Carl Jung and his ideas, because I see him as a creative genius. And I think seeing him that way gives a lot of insight into how his mind was seeing the psyche and its layers and the imagination required to understand it the way he does.
Right.
So yeah, I have a number of series about Jung. I have everything else about creative geniuses like Vincent van Gogh and Emily Dickinson and Frida Kahlo and Leonardo da Vinci. So yeah, check it out. I'll always be there. I'm constantly working on some new stuff. Right now I'm working on a tarot series.
Oh, cool.
And it's also going to be about synchronicity and some of Jung's ideas some more. So the alchemy specific episodes are 39, 40, 41, 42 in the feed.
Love it. Yep. Yeah, I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Definitely check it out, Creative Codex, y'all. And thank you once again, MJ, for being here today. Thank you to all the listeners for getting this far, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, brother.